basically, earlier I asked you guys, do you think that Final Fantasy worlds are going to be in Unreality, right? And whether or not you like, are they going to be in Quadradum? And someone did say this earlier, and it's along my lines of thinking. Someone said, well, that they think like Radiant Garden is kind of like that thing. And this is something I was thinking about the other day. People were saying, oh, the Final Fantasy worlds, they could be in Unreality. But how does that work if the Final Fantasy characters are already in Kingdom Hearts? Like, if you've got it where it's a big deal to be able to cross to the other side, like it's a massive thing, like, oh my gosh, Sora's over there, how are we going to get him back, right? Then how did the Final Fantasy characters get to the Kingdom Hearts reality if they're originally from Unreality? And why don't they ever say that? Why don't they ever talk about it? And if you remember, even in Remind, the Final Fantasy characters were helping to try and find Sora. If they knew about Unreality, wouldn't they just say, oh yeah, he's over there. Yeah, he's probably hanging out in Midgard. Yeah, that's where we're from. Like, wouldn't they just say that? Why would, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that was, I know people are gonna hate that. Because people were just like, no, we're having Final Fantasy Unreality. But that is like my big, like, I thought about it the other day and I never thought about it before. And I was like, hold on a minute. Like, that doesn't even make sense. How are they in Radiant Garden? And remember, in Kingdom Hearts 1, when you first meet them in Traverse Town, they say their world was like destroyed or it fell to darkness. They're not talking about the original Final Fantasy worlds. They were talking about Radiant Garden becoming Hollow Bastion, right? So why, like, do you know what I mean? Like, Aerith doesn't say, oh, I'm from Midgard. She says, like, the original world she's talking about is Radiant Garden. So unless they all have some amnesia, which I guess is possible, but unless they all have like some amnesia or something, it's like, how did they, you know what I mean? And how did they even get to the Kingdom Hearts reality? How did they even cross over? If it's supposed to be the only way you get there is through an arc or breaking a nature taboo or something like that, or like what Riku did using, you know, the power of waking to, with the Nameless Star or whatever. Like, how are they supposed to get there? You get what I'm saying? So I don't know. Like, it doesn't really make sense to me. Like, because it's an extremely popular idea that Final Fantasy worlds will be in Unreality, but it doesn't really make sense if the Final Fantasy characters are already in Kingdom Hearts. How does that work? How does that work? And why have they never mentioned anything to do with it? You know what I'm saying? Like, so I don't know. I thought about it the other day, and I know no one wants to hear it. No one wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. No one wants to hear that. But there could be a reason for it, but I don't know. Right now, it's not really lining up. It's not really lining up. So that's why I asked that question earlier, because I know it's an extremely popular thing, and yeah, I don't know about all that. You know, that being said, Quadranum obviously, you know, does translate to square. It is possible other square properties could be, you know, there or something. But I don't know about well, it's just a theory. It could be other square properties, but I don't know about Final Fantasy. It's just, again, if that is the case, they need to explain that. That definitely has to get explained. Like, that's not one retcon Nomura can just glaze over. If he makes Final Fantasy worlds be in there, someone did mention earlier, like maybe it'll be different versions, or maybe it'll be different Final Fantasy worlds that aren't in Kingdom Hearts. I suppose they could do that because the Final Fantasy games are supposed to be self-contained. But I don't know. It just seems a bit sketchy to me. Says that thing, you mean the Midgard one that is kind of resembled to Radiant Garden World? Like, they pose an image of Sora poses from Cloud in Midgard? Well, no. Just the fact that Radiant Garden is literally the world of Final Fantasy characters. That's their hub. That's where they're from. Like in Kingdom Hearts, anyway, that's where they claim. That's what they say they're from. When they're in Traverse Town, that's the world they're referring to. And it has to be anyway, because you've got characters from multiple. Like, you've got Aerith and Cloud, and why am I forgetting this dude's name now? You guys know who I'm talking about from FF8. But like, it's like they're from different Final Fantasy games, but they're all in Radiant Garden. So it's like that's their world, right? So how can they all be from Unreality?
With all that being said, someone did comment on the live stream afterwards suggesting something very interesting, which is that perhaps in each of the Final Fantasy games and stories, because the characters may have gone through certain events or had certain outcomes, that I guess maybe you could consider to be breaking a nature taboo, or perhaps it could be rationalized in some way that based on some of the lore in some of these worlds where certain stories in Final Fantasy are related to dreams and some of them are related to memories and things of that nature, it's possible that perhaps somehow through some Nomura machinations you could justify their existence and how they ended up in the Kingdom Hearts reality. And this commenter did go on to say that they don't see any reason why Kingdom Hearts mechanics would apply to whether or not the Final Fantasy characters show up. Now, I personally thought this was a very interesting take, and something that I actually added as a suggestion to this was, well, if we do end up visiting, let's say, Final Fantasy worlds, then it could actually be part of their plot and actually make the Final Fantasy worlds relevant to the Kingdom Hearts story, just like how each Disney world is supposed to usually tie into the overall theme of whichever Kingdom Hearts game they're in, right? So the same way like how in Kingdom Hearts 3 we're going to go to a world like Toy Box and how hearts relate to toys and how that ties into the overall plot, well, same type of thing. If we go to a Final Fantasy world and we're in a place like Spira and we're talking about that world and how it relates to something that relates to Kingdom Hearts, then I could see how that could work. And I do think just in terms of the Final Fantasy characters that are in Kingdom Hearts, it might add some lore to them and explain why they're there. Even though in Kingdom Hearts world they're from Radiant Garden, well, actually you've also got characters like Tidus on Destiny Islands and Cypher in Twilight Town, so they're kind of spread out amongst the Kingdom Hearts worlds. But you get what I'm saying, we know that in actual fact they're not from Kingdom Hearts at all, right? So perhaps that could be Nomura's way of, I guess you could say, retconning why Final Fantasy characters are in Kingdom Hearts, but perhaps doing it in a way that could be quite interesting and still thematically relevant to the future story of Kingdom Hearts. But if you're also thinking, well, you know, yeah, why should the rules of Kingdom Hearts apply to them? Like, why does it even really matter? They're Final Fantasy characters, right? Well, that's the thing. In terms of keeping the canon consistent and for the world building and story to actually make sense, it should be that the rules apply to the Final Fantasy characters. I mean, if you've got the Final Fantasy characters all sitting around stumped about Sora's whereabouts, then how can they possibly be doing that and also be from the other side? Again, if that happens, they have to explain this. Nomura can't just sit there and be like, nope, we're just in Midgard now and Aerith's there and we're not going to explain that. It doesn't make sense. I don't think he would ever not explain that anyway, so if we end up seeing Final Fantasy is somehow in Kingdom Hearts, there's definitely going to have to be a very good explanation for it, because based on what we know right now, that should not be possible at all. And again, like I said in the stream, I know nobody wants to hear that, and I know that it's something that's going to get on people's nerves because we all want Final Fantasy, and trust me, I want Final Fantasy as much as anyone else. But on the bright side, like I say, perhaps this offers an opportunity. If they do decide to put Final Fantasy in Unreality, perhaps this is an opportunity to actually make a very interesting story out of that. And again, if the worlds are going to be there, well, this is how the worlds themselves may tie in and be really cool and interesting as well. I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm not sure whether or not we really need to traverse worlds at all. I really wouldn't be surprised if Quadradum wasn't the main place that the entire story was taking place or something like that. If Nomura wants to change the formula, that would be changing the formula, considering every Kingdom Hearts game for the most part has had the same type of formula of going and traversing worlds. So if you want to change it and not keep it formulaic, maybe breaking out of that specific tradition would be the way to go, which again also implies that perhaps no Final Fantasy worlds. That's not to say it can't happen, and again, it's not to say that I don't personally want it to happen, but it's just something that I'm not quite sure how possible that really is anymore without a great deal of explanation and or retconning. But of course, this video would not be complete if I didn't at least acknowledge this scene.
Huh?
Where'd they go? Do you think they made it back to their own world?
They went somewhere else.
Yeah, very odd. And whether or not Nomura will ever bring it back or make any kind of reference to it or make it relevant later, I really don't know. But I certainly could see how, if he did, this may be one of the ways that he ties Final Fantasy into Phase 2. Certainly an interesting thing to think about. Certainly interesting. But anyway, you guys let me know what your thoughts are on it in the comments below. This is all I've got to say on the matter. I appreciate you guys for checking out this entire video. My name is NextGenNovelist, and that's all I've got to say, and I'm out. Peace.